The Beatles changed popular music forever. From the moment John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr began turning their ideas into records, their influence spread far beyond Liverpool. Their songs would inspire generations of musicians, reshape rock and pop, and permanently change the possibilities of what a studio recording could become. But the Beatles did not create their music in a vacuum. They were listeners before they were legends. They absorbed American rock and roll, Motown, soul, folk, rhythm and blues, music hall, and countless other sounds. And Paul McCartney was remarkably open about the musicians who helped shape the Beatles' own music. In fact, McCartney once described the Beatles with a surprisingly blunt phrase, "We were the biggest knickers in town, plagiarists extraordinaire." He wasn't seriously accusing the band of stealing songs. Rather, he was acknowledging something that has always been true of great musicians. They listen, absorb, experiment, and transform their influences into something new. Here are 3 Beatles songs McCartney specifically connected to other bands and artists. Number 1. Not a Second Time, The Miracles.
Oh, no, not a second time.
By the time the Beatles were recording their second album, With the Beatles, American rhythm and blues and soul music had already become a major part of their musical DNA. One of the groups that fascinated them was the Miracles, led by the legendary Smokey Robinson. McCartney later explained that the Beatles were heavily influenced by the American group's songwriting and vocal style. And Not a Second Time provides an excellent example of how those influences were finding their way into the band's early work. Although the song was credited to Lennon and McCartney, it was primarily written by John Lennon. Lennon himself once recalled that he was trying to write something in the style of Smokey Robinson around this period. That influence is not difficult to hear. The song has the emotional directness and sophisticated chord movement that had become associated with American R&B and soul. Rather than simply reproducing what the Miracles had done, Lennon and the Beatles absorbed the feeling and translated it into their own developing sound. It was part of a pattern that would become increasingly important throughout the Beatles' career. They listened, they borrowed ideas, and then they transformed them. Number 2. In My Life, The Miracles.
All my life, though some have changed, some...
If Not a Second Time demonstrates the Beatles' early fascination with the Miracles, In My Life shows just how deeply that influence could become woven into their songwriting. Released on Rubber Soul in 1965, In My Life has become one of the most admired Beatles songs ever recorded. But the story behind it is particularly fascinating because Lennon and McCartney remembered the songwriting process differently. Lennon had the basic idea and lyrics. The song began as a nostalgic reflection on places and people from his past, inspired partly by Liverpool. McCartney later recalled that Lennon had written the opening lyrics, but did not yet have the melody he wanted. So McCartney took the words and began working on the music. And in his own recollection, he turned to one of his favorite influences, Smokey Robinson and the Miracles. As McCartney explained, in many years from now, he went downstairs to a mellotron and began constructing a melody inspired by the group. He specifically remembered songs such as You've Really Got a Hold on Me as an important influence. McCartney recalled, I sat there and put together a tune based in my mind on Smokey Robinson and the Miracles. That is one of the most revealing comments McCartney has ever made about his songwriting process. He wasn't trying to copy a particular song. Instead, he was trying to capture the spirit of music he loved. As he explained, you could take something you admired, absorb its character, and then use that feeling to create something completely new. That approach became central to the Beatles' development. In My Life eventually emerged as something far more sophisticated than its influences. The song combined Lennon's deeply personal lyrics with McCartney's elegant melody, producing a recording that sounded unmistakably like the Beatles. And there was another element of the Miracles' influence that McCartney remembered. He believed the opening guitar figure had the feeling of an old Miracles record. As he put it, he was imagining the introduction of a Miracles recording when developing the song. The result was one of the most intimate and timeless songs in the Beatles' catalog. Number 3. Good Day Sunshine, The Lovin Spoonful.
Good day, sunshine. I need to laugh.
By 1966, the Beatles had changed dramatically. They had stopped touring, allowing them to spend far more time experimenting in the studio. Their music was becoming more adventurous, but they were still paying close attention to what other musicians were doing. One of the groups that caught Paul McCartney's attention was the Lovin Spoonful. The American folk rock band had enjoyed a series of major hits, including Do You Believe in Magic, Summer in the City, and Daydream. And Daydream was particularly important. Released in early 1966, the song helped create the sunny, carefree atmosphere that McCartney wanted to capture with a new Beatles composition. That song became Good Day Sunshine. McCartney later explained that there was a wave of bright, summery songs appearing around the same time. Around that time, there was quite a spate of summer songs. Daydream and Summer in the City by the Lovin Spoonful, The Kinks, Sunny Afternoon. The Beatles wanted their own contribution to that musical mood, and McCartney knew exactly what kind of feeling he wanted. We wanted to write something sunny. The result was one of the warmest and most cheerful songs on Revolver. Good Day Sunshine doesn't sound like a copy of Daydream. Instead, McCartney took the idea of the carefree summer song and filtered it through the Beatles' own musical personality. The lyrics are simple and almost childlike in their happiness. Sunshine, walking outside, sitting beneath a tree and enjoying the company of someone you love. It was deliberately uncomplicated. After years of Beatlemania, screaming audiences, and increasingly complicated studio experiments, Good Day Sunshine offered something remarkably pure. Happiness, sunlight, summer, and a melody designed to make the listener smile. McCartney later explained that these kinds of songs had always existed in British popular culture. He remembered the old music hall tradition and songs such as The Sun Has Got His Hat On and On the Sunny Side of the Street. The Beatles were taking all of those influences and creating their own version of a perfect summer song. The Beatles were never afraid to listen. Perhaps the most interesting thing about these three songs is that none of them sounds like a simple imitation. That was one of the Beatles' greatest strengths. They could hear something they loved in another artist's music, absorb it, reshape it, and turn it into something that belonged entirely to them. The Miracles helped inspire the emotional and melodic character behind songs such as Not a Second Time and In My Life. The Lovin Spoonful helped spark the sunny atmosphere of Good Day Sunshine. And there were countless other influences along the way. The Beatles listened to Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Buddy Holly, Motown, soul, folk, classical music, Indian music, and contemporary British groups. They were constantly absorbing new sounds. That willingness to listen may have been one of the secrets behind their extraordinary evolution. They didn't simply imitate their heroes, they studied them. They experimented with what they heard. And then they pushed those ideas somewhere new. That is why decades later, musicians still study the Beatles in exactly the same way. The band that inspired so many artists was itself built from inspiration. And Paul McCartney never seemed embarrassed to admit it.